The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Remove humanity from the galaxy. Ambassador Kale Voss stood perfectly still behind the diplomatic barrier. His hands were clasped behind his back. His jaw was tight. His dark eyes burned with controlled fury that most species in the Galactic Council chamber mistook for fear. They were wrong. Every translator implant in the massive cathedral-like chamber buzzed with the echo of those 5 words. Representatives from 47 spacefaring civilizations shifted in their hovering seats. Some nodded their bulbous heads. Others clicked their mandibles in approval. A few, very few, looked uncomfortable. But nobody objected. Nobody except a single human standing alone on the speaking floor. Kale Voss, 43 years old, former United Nations crisis negotiator, former Marine, current and first permanent ambassador of Earth to the Galactic Council. He took a slow breath. He looked up at the towering figure who had spoken, High Legislator Drain Varadi of the Torani hegemony, a 9-foot reptilian whose scales shimmered like liquid bronze under the chamber's pale blue lights. "Could you repeat that, High Legislator?" Kale said. His voice was calm. Too calm. "I want to make sure the translators got it right." Drain Varadi bared rows of serrated teeth in what passed for a smile among his kind. "You heard correctly, human. The motion has been formally entered. Resolution July 7th, 14. The immediate and complete removal of humanity from all galactic territories, the revocation of Earth's provisional membership, and the establishment of a permanent exclusion zone around your solar system." He paused, letting the weight of it settle. "You will be quarantined, contained, forgotten." A murmur of approval rippled through the chamber. Kale looked around the room slowly, deliberately, meeting as many eyes and eye equivalents as he could. The Velcari delegates, tall and willowy with skin like stretched parchment, avoided his gaze. The Bryn Collective, a hive-mind species that communicated through bioluminescent pulses, flickered nervously. The Karathi, squat in armor like living tanks, stared back with open hostility. He had been warned this might happen. Earth's intelligence agencies, the ones the Council didn't know about, had intercepted fragmented communications suggesting a coalition was forming against humanity. But the speed of it, the brazenness of putting it to a formal vote barely 3 years after Earth had been granted provisional membership, that surprised even him. "May I ask," Kale said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber with practiced ease, "what humanity has done to warrant removal from the galactic community?" Drain corrected him smoothly. "Not extermination. Removal. We are not barbarians, Ambassador. Your species will be confined to your home system. You simply will not be permitted to spread." "Spread," Kale repeated, "like a disease, if the comparison fits." Laughter. Actual laughter from several delegations. The Fenari ambassador, a creature that resembled a 6-armed otter with too many teeth, slapped its tail against its podium in amusement. Kale didn't flinch. "I'd like to hear the specific charges," he said. Drain Vorarati gestured to the central display. A holographic projection bloomed to life in the middle of the chamber. Images began cycling. Human cargo ships, human mining operations, human diplomatic missions on various worlds. In 3 standard years of provisional membership, Drain began, his voice taking on a rehearsed cadence of prosecutor, humanity has engaged in aggressive economic expansion across 14 trade sectors, undercutting established pricing structures that have been stable for centuries. Your species has filed 742 patent claims on technologies you barely understand, using what you call reverse engineering, a polite term for intellectual theft. More murmurs, more nodding heads. Your colonists have settled on worlds in the neutral fringe without proper authorization. Your military vessels, which you were told to decommission, have been spotted in restricted space on no fewer than 31 occasions. And perhaps most troubling of all, Drain paused for dramatic effect. His golden eyes narrowed. Your species has been conducting unauthorized genetic research, the kind that has been banned by this council for over 10,000 years. The chamber erupted. Species that have been sitting quietly suddenly roared their disapproval. Fists, claws, tentacles, and appendages Kale didn't have names for slammed against podiums. The noise was deafening. Kale stood in the center of it all, motionless. He waited. The council moderator, an ancient AI construct that manifested as a floating geometric shape, pulsed with calming light and emitted a harmonic tone that gradually silenced the chamber. "The floor remains with the human ambassador," the moderator intoned. "Ambassador Voss, you may respond to the charges." Kale nodded slowly. He reached into the inner pocket of his dark suit jacket and produced a small device, A standard datapad. Human-made. Unremarkable. I appreciate the theatrics, High Legislator, Kale began. Really, I do. That was a well-rehearsed presentation. But I have a few corrections to make before this council votes on whether to erase my species from the stars. Drain Vorati's eyes narrowed. You have 5 minutes. I'll take as long as I need, Kale replied. Council rules grant the accused unlimited response time, the formal removal resolutions. Section 14, Article 9, Paragraph 3. I read the rule book, High Legislator, cover to cover, twice. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. Several delegates exchanged glances. Drain's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The moderator confirmed the rule with a soft chime. Kale stepped forward. The holographic display shifted to accommodate his datapad's uplink. Let's start with the economic charges, he said. You claim humanity undercut established pricing structures. That's true. We did. Because your established pricing structures were a cartel. Silence. The Taurani hegemony, the Velcari Dominion, and the Fenari Trade Guild have maintained artificial price floors on reactor fuel, medical compounds, and FTL navigation data for the last 600 years. Together, these three powers control 87% of essential commodity trade in the galaxy. The remaining 44 member species pay whatever prices these three dictate. There is no competition. There is no alternative. There is no free market. He tapped his datapad. A cascade of financial records flooded the holographic display. Trade agreements, pricing tables, internal communications. When Earth entered the market and offered the same goods at fair prices, we didn't undercut anyone. We simply refused to participate in the extortion. And suddenly, species that had been paying 300% markups on reactor fuel had a choice for the first time in centuries. The chamber had gone very quiet. The Fenari ambassador's tail had stopped slapping. As for the patent claims, Kale continued, yes, we filed 742 of them. Every single one was for technology we developed independently. Human engineers looked at your FTL drives and said, we can do this better. And we did. 40% more efficient, 60% cheaper to manufacture. That's not intellectual theft. That's innovation. And it terrifies you. Drain Vorati leaned forward. You are treading on dangerous ground. Human. I'm standing on solid ground, Legislator. There's a difference. Kale didn't break eye contact. Now, let's talk about the colonies in the neutral fringe. More data flooded the display. Survey reports, geological analyses, atmospheric readings. The neutral fringe contains over 2,000 habitable worlds. In the 4,000 years since this council was established, do you know how many of those worlds have been colonized? 11. 11 out of 2,000. And all 11 were colonized by the Taurani hegemony, despite the fringe being designated as open territory for all member species. He turned to face the wider chamber. Humanity settled on 3 worlds in the fringe, worlds that no other species had claimed, surveyed, or expressed interest in. We followed every protocol. We filed every form. And we were denied permission anyway, not because we violated any rule, but because certain powers didn't want humans getting a foothold outside our home system. Drain scales had darkened, a sign of agitation among the Taurani. These are distortions. These are facts, Kale cut in, and I have the documentation to prove every single one of them. But let's get to the big one, shall we? The one you saved for last because you knew it would get the biggest reaction. He paused, looking around the chamber. Genetic research. The tension in the room became almost physical. You claim humanity has been conducting banned genetic research. And you're right. We have been researching genetics. Every species does. But the specific research you're referring to, the kind that's been banned for 10,000 years, that's not what we've been doing. He tapped his datapad again. A new set of documents appeared on the display. Medical files, research papers, clinical trial results. What humanity has been researching is a cure for Kelleran syndrome. The chamber went completely, utterly silent. Kelleran syndrome, a degenerative genetic disease that affected 17 of the Council's member species. It was slow, agonizing, and invariably fatal. It had killed billions over the millennia, and the Council's official position, maintained for 10,000 years, was that genetic intervention to cure it was too dangerous, that it could lead to weaponized genetic engineering, to bioweapons, to horrors that the galaxy's ancient civilizations had learned to fear. So they let their people die instead. 47 million sentient beings die of Kelleran syndrome every standard year. Kale said quietly. 47 million. And this council decided 10,000 years ago that researching a cure was too risky, that the potential for misuse outweighed the certainty of suffering. He let that sink in. Humanity didn't accept that math. We never have. Where we come from, when people are dying and you have the ability to help, you help. You don't form a committee. You don't file a resolution. You get to work. He pulled up a final document, a single page, dense with data. 6 months ago, a team of researchers at the Nakamura Institute in Tokyo successfully developed a genetic therapy that eliminates Kelleran syndrome. Not treats it, not manages it, eliminates it. Completely, permanently. It works across all 17 affected species. It has no weaponization potential. Our team specifically designed it that way, and it's ready for distribution. He looked directly at Drain Vorati. That is the banned genetic research you want to punish us for. We cured a disease that you decided wasn't worth curing, and now you want to lock us in our solar system and throw away the key. Drain Vorati's response was immediate and sharp. The ban exists for a reason, human. You are a young species. You don't understand the dangers. I understand them perfectly, Kale said. I also understand that the Taurani hegemony has been selling palliative treatments for Kelleran syndrome for the last 800 years. Treatments, not cures. And that those treatments represent the single largest revenue stream in the Taurani pharmaceutical sector. The silence that followed was so deep, so absolute, that Kale could hear the faint hum of the station's environmental systems. You don't want us gone because we're dangerous, Kale said. His voice dropped low, carrying a weight that pressed against every consciousness in that chamber. You want us gone because we're inconvenient, because we showed up and started doing the things you could have done centuries ago, but chose not to, because the suffering of others was profitable for you. Drain Vorati rose to his full 9-foot height. His scales flushed dark crimson. You go too far, Ambassador. I haven't even started. Kale turned his back on the High Legislator, a deliberate insult in Taurani culture, and he addressed the full chamber. I want every delegate in this room to understand something about humanity, something that I think many of you have missed in the 3 years since we joined this council. He walked slowly across the speaking floor, his footsteps echoing in the silence. When we first made contact with the Taurani scout ship that entered our system, we were terrified, genuinely terrified. We had dreamed about alien life for centuries, but we never knew if we'd meet friends or conquerors. And when the Taurani offered us provisional membership in the Galactic Council, we were grateful, honored. We thought we'd been invited to join a community of enlightened civilizations. He stopped walking. It took us about 6 months to realize we'd been invited to join a protection racket. Gasps, clicking mandibles, flickering bioluminescence. The Galactic Council isn't a governing body. It's a hierarchy. 3 species at the top, the Taurani, the Velcari, and the Fenari, and everyone else fighting for scraps. You control the trade routes. You control the military corridors. You control the information networks. You set the prices, you make the rules, and anyone who objects gets exactly what's happening to us right now. A resolution for removal. He pulled up another set of data. Lists of names, dates, species. In the last 4,000 years, this council has passed removal resolutions against 12 species, 12 civilizations, confined to their home systems, cut off from the rest of the galaxy. And do you know what every single one of those 12 species had in common? He looked around the room. They all threatened the economic dominance of the top 3. Every single one. The Draelit developed cheap FTL drives. Removed. The Hanori created a universal translation matrix. Removed. The OSK Vari proposed democratic reform of the council's voting structure. Removed within a year. Delegates were shifting in their seats now. Some looked angry. Others looked ashamed. A few looked like they were hearing their own suspicions confirmed for the very first time. Humanity is species number 13 on your list, Kale said. And I am here to tell you that we will not go quietly. Drain Vorati's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Is that a threat, Ambassador? Kale turned to face him. No, High Legislator. It's a statement of fact. And here's another one. He tapped his data pad one final time. The holographic display changed. What appeared was not a document or a financial record. It was a star map, the full galactic map used by the Council, showing every claimed territory, every trade route, every military installation. But this map had additions, thousands of them, small blue dots, scattered across the galaxy, in the neutral fringe, along the major trade corridors, near key resource worlds, around communication relay stations. Everywhere. What is this? Drain demanded. This, Kale said calmly, is a location of every human asset currently operating in the galaxy. The chamber erupted in chaos. Kale raised his voice above the noise, and something in his tone, something hard and ancient and unyielding, cut through it. You told us to decommission our military vessels. We didn't. You told us to limit our expansion. We didn't. You told us to stay in our lane, play by your rules, and be grateful for the privilege of your attention. He smiled. It was not a warm smile. We didn't. In 3 years, while you were busy congratulating yourselves on how effectively you contained the new species, humanity deployed 412 stealth-capable vessels across the galaxy. We established listening posts on 200 worlds. We built manufacturing facilities in locations you haven't even surveyed. We created trade relationships with 93 independent species who aren't members of this council because they were wise enough or afraid enough not to join. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. You thought we were sitting in our little corner of the galaxy, play with our toys, waiting for permission to exist. But that's not what humans do. We don't wait for permission. We never have. Drain Vorati was shaking. Whether with rage or something else, Kale couldn't tell. This is an act of war, the Taurani hissed. No, Kale said firmly. War is what happens when diplomacy fails. And diplomacy hasn't failed yet. Not unless you vote to make it fail. He turned back to the full chamber. Here is what humanity is offering, not requesting. Offering. He raised one finger. First, the Kelleran syndrome cure, distributed freely to every affected species. No cost, no conditions, no patents. A second finger. Second, open source access to our improved FDL drive technology, which will cut travel times by 40% and reduce fuel costs by 60% for every ship in the galaxy. A third finger. Third, a proposal for democratic reform of the Council's voting structure. One species, one vote. No vetoes. No permanent seats. No hierarchy. A fourth finger. Fourth, the establishment of a free trade zone in the neutral fringe, open to all species, governed by transparent rules and independent arbitration. He lowered his hand. And here is what happens if you vote for Resolution July 7th, 14. His voice changed. It didn't get louder. It got quieter. And somehow that was worse. If you vote to remove humanity, we don't go home. We can't go home. We're already everywhere. You'd have to find us. And you can't. Our stealth technology is 3 generations ahead of anything in this chamber. We know, because we've been studying your sensors for 3 years, and we know exactly what they can and can't detect. He looked at Drain. You would have to fight us, and I want to be very clear about what that would mean. He tapped his datapad. A technical readout appeared on the display. Weapon specifications, shield harmonics, tactical analyses. Humanity has been fighting wars for our entire history. It's one of the things we're most ashamed of, and one of the things we're best at. We have studied every military engagement recorded in the Council's archives. We have analyzed the tactics, strategies, and doctrines of every spacefaring civilization, and we have spent the last 3 years adapting our own military capabilities accordingly. He looked around the room. We don't want a war. We have never wanted a war. The very first thing we did when we joined this council was establish a medical research program to cure a disease that was killing millions of people who were not human. That should tell you everything you need to know about what kind of species we are. He stepped closer to the center of the floor. But we will not be caged. We will not be silenced. And we will not stand by while a handful of powerful species exploit the rest of the galaxy for profit. He straightened his jacket, a simple human gesture that somehow carried enormous weight. You have a choice. You can vote to remove us and discover just how deeply and permanently humanity has woven itself into the fabric of this galaxy. Or you can vote to keep us and discover what happens when a species that solves problems joins a community that's been ignoring them. He looked at Drain Vorati one last time. But let me be absolutely clear about one thing, High Legislator. Whatever you decide today, humanity is not leaving. We are here. We are staying. And we are just getting started. He stepped back from the speaking floor and clasped his hands behind his back. The floor is yours. The silence lasted 11 seconds. Kale counted. He had learned, in years of crisis negotiation, that silence was the most powerful tool in any diplomat's arsenal. The person who broke it first was the person who had lost control. It was not Drain Vorati who broke it. It was the Bryn Collective. The hive mind's bioluminescent pulses cascaded across their delegation pod in a waterfall of blue and gold light, the colors of formal address. Their translation output was rendered in the flat, precise tones the collective always used. But there was something different in the pattern, something that sounded almost like emotion. The Bryn collective wishes to address the chamber. The moderator chimed his approval. "We have served on this council for 2,317 years, the collective said. In that time, we have observed 112 removal resolutions. We voted in favor of each one. We were told it was necessary. We were told it was for the safety of the galaxy. We believe this." The bioluminescence shifted to a deep, pulsing violet, the color of shame. "We no longer believe this." The chamber stirred. The human ambassador's words are difficult to hear. They are more difficult to deny. The Bryn collective has examined the evidence presented, the financial records, the trade monopolies, the pattern of removals. "We find the evidence compelling." They paused. The violet deepened. "We also find it damning. Of ourselves as much as anyone. We were complicit. We chose comfort over truth. We are not proud of this." Another pause. "The Bryn collective will vote against Resolution July 7th, 14. Furthermore, we formally request a full investigation into the circumstances surrounding all previous removal resolutions. And we wish to state, for the record, that the Bryn collective would like access to the Kelleran syndrome cure. 17% of our population carries the genetic markers. We have been losing members of our collective to this disease for 900 years. The violet faded, replaced by a warm, steady amber, the color of hope. "We have been dying, and we accepted it because we were told there was no alternative. The humans found an alternative. They found it for us, for species they had never met, and they're offering for free." The amber intensified. "We do not know yet what kind of species humanity truly is, but we know what kind of species does what they have done, and it is not the kind that should be removed from the galaxy." The dam broke. The Karathi delegation requested the floor next. Their ambassador, a stocky armored female named Commander Tesh, stood heavily and spoke in the grinding, bass tones of her species. "The Karathi have no love for humans," she began bluntly. "You are loud. You are reckless. You multiply like parasites and spread like fungus." She turned her heavy gaze toward Drain Vorati. "But you fight. You fight well. And you fight for reasons beyond territory and resources." The human ambassador spoke of curing a disease not because it affected a species, but because it affected others. "The Karathi understand this concept. We call it Wrecker. The obligation of the strong to defend the weak." She paused. "The Taurani have never practiced Wrecker. They practice dominance. There is a difference." She slammed her fist against her podium, a Karathi gesture of finality. "The Karathi vote against the resolution, and if the Taurani attempt to enforce removal by military means, the Karathi will consider it an act of aggression against a council member species and respond accordingly." One by one, they came forward. The Delan, a species of empaths who had remained silent for decades, spoke in their whispering, multi-layered voices about the emotional patterns they had detected in the chamber. Patterns of deception from the Taurani delegation. Patterns of genuine conviction from the human ambassador. The Asari, aquatic beings who communicated through complex chemical signals translated by specialized equipment, submitted a formal analysis of the trade data Kale had presented, confirming its accuracy down to the decimal point. The Tenmari, an ancient species that served as the galaxy's unofficial historians, rose with gravity that silenced the room. They confirmed what Kale had alleged, that every removed species had indeed posed an economic threat to the dominant powers. They presented their own records they had kept for millennia but never shared, because no one had ever asked. "We kept the truth," the Tenmari historian said in a voice like crumbling stone, "because we believed someday someone would come looking for it. We did not expect it to be the youngest species in the room." Drain Vorati watched his coalition crumble in real time. The Velkari delegation, which had been counted on as a reliable ally, fractured. Their senior ambassador voted to maintain the resolution, but their junior delegates broke ranks and abstained. It was unprecedented in Velkari political history. The Fenari Trade Guild, seeing the writing on the wall, quietly withdrew their co-sponsorship of the resolution. Their ambassador made a brief statement about reassessing the guild's position in light of new information, which everyone understood to mean they were jumping ship before it sank. Drain stood alone at his podium, his scales cycling through shades of crimson and black. his clawed hands gripping the edges of the platform hard enough to leave marks in the alien metal. "This is a farce," he snarled. "You are all being manipulated by a primitive species that has been part of this council for 3 years. 3 years. They admit to violating our laws, deploying military assets without authorization, conducting banned research, and you reward them for it." He pointed a clawed finger at Kale. "This human has stood on this floor and threatened every one of you. He has told you, to your faces, that his species has infiltrated your territories, your trade routes, your communication networks. And your response is to applaud?" He looked around the chamber with something approaching desperation. "Do you not see what they are? They are predators. Clever predators, yes. Charismatic predators, certainly, but predators nonetheless. They will consume everything you have, and when there is nothing left, they will turn on each other. It is in their nature. We have all seen the records of their history, the wars, the genocides, the environmental destruction of their own world. This is what they are." He slammed both fists on his podium. "And you want to let them stay?" Kale requested the floor. The moderator granted it. He walked to the center of the speaking platform and stood there for a moment, looking up at Drain Verratti. "You're right," he said simply. The chamber went quiet again. "Everything you just said about humanity is right. We are predators. We have fought wars. We have committed genocides. We nearly destroyed our own planet before we figured out how to save it. Our history is soaked in blood and fire and the most creative forms of cruelty the universe has probably ever seen." He paused. "And that is exactly why we are the species that cured Kelleran syndrome." He began to walk slowly, his voice carrying the quiet intensity of absolute conviction. "We know what suffering looks like. We know it intimately, because we have caused it and endured it in equal measure. We have done terrible things to each other. And every single one of those terrible things taught us something. It taught us what not to do. It taught us what mattered. It taught us that the measure of a civilization is not its power, or its technology, or its territory. It is how it treats the beings who cannot fight back." He stopped and looked around the chamber. "We learned those lessons the hard way, through centuries of pain, through millions of lives lost to our own stupidity and cruelty. And we are still learning. We are not a perfect species. We are not even a good species. Not yet, but we are a species that looks at a problem, even a problem that doesn't affect us directly, and says, we can fix that." He looked back at Drain. "High Legislator, you asked this council if they want to let us stay. Let me rephrase the question. Do they want to lock away the only species in this galaxy that looked at 47 million people dying every year and said, that's unacceptable?" He shook his head slowly. "Humanity doesn't need this council. We've already proven that. We can survive on our own. We can thrive on our own. We've been doing it for thousands of years in the most hostile environment you can imagine. A world where everything, from the weather to the wildlife to the microbes in our blood, was trying to kill us every single day." He squared his shoulders. "But we don't want to be alone. We came out here because we believe, perhaps naively, perhaps stubbornly, but genuinely, that the galaxy is better when civilizations work together, that the problems we face are too big for any one species, that somewhere out here, among all these stars and all these worlds and all these beautifully different forms of life, there is a future worth building." He extended his hand, palm open, fingers spread, a human gesture of peace that had no equivalent in any other galactic culture, but whose meaning was somehow immediately, universally understood. "We're offering you a partnership, real partnership, not the kind where one species dominates and the rest obey, the kind where everyone has a voice, everyone has a stake, and everyone shares in the work and the rewards." His voice softened. "We're offering you the future. Take it or leave it. But don't pretend that removing us from the galaxy is about protecting anyone. It's about protecting a system that has failed almost everyone in this room." The vote was called 30 minutes later. Resolution July 7th, 14. The removal of humanity from the galaxy. 47 member species voted. 41 voted against the resolution. 3 abstained. 3 voted in favor. The Taurani hegemony and 2 minor client species under their direct economic control. The resolution failed. Kale Voss stood on the speaking floor as the results were announced, his face impassive, his hands still clasped behind his back. He showed no triumph, no celebration. He simply nodded once, as if the outcome had been expected all along, which, if you knew Kale Voss, you knew it had been. What the council didn't know, what almost no one knew, was what had happened in the 48 hours before the vote. Kale had received the intelligence about the resolution 72 hours in advance. He had immediately contacted Earth, spoken directly with the Secretary General, the Joint Chiefs, and the directors of 6 intelligence agencies. Within 6 hours, a plan was in motion. The 412 stealth vessels he had mentioned in his address, they were real, every single one. But they hadn't been deployed over the course of 3 years, as he had implied. Some had been in position for less than 6 months. Humanity had been planning for this contingency since the day they joined the Council. The Kelleran syndrome cure? Also real, but its completion had been accelerated specifically for this moment. The researchers at the Nakamura Institute had been working around the clock for months, knowing that the cure would be humanity's most powerful diplomatic weapon. And the trade data, the financial records, the evidence of the Torani cartel, Kale's intelligence teams had been compiling that dossier for 2 years, waiting for the right moment to deploy it. Everything Kale had said on that floor was true, every word. But the timing, the presentation, the strategic deployment of each piece of information, that was pure human strategy. The art of war applied to diplomacy. Sun Tzu in a suit and tie. In the days that followed, the galaxy began to change. The Kelleran syndrome cure was distributed within a week. Human medical teams, working alongside local physicians on 17 different worlds, began treating patients immediately. The first wave of cures affected over 2 million individuals. The images broadcast across the galactic communication networks of beings who had been told their entire lives that they would die slowly and painfully, suddenly told they would live. Those images did more for humanity's reputation than 1,000 speeches. The improved FTL drive specifications were released as open-source technology as promised. Within a month, independent shipyards across the galaxy were producing the new drives. Travel times dropped. Fuel costs plummeted. Species that had been economically isolated by the old system suddenly found themselves connected to trade routes they had never been able to afford. The democratic reform proposal was debated for 3 months before being adopted. The Torani hegemony fought it at every stage. But they were fighting alone now. The Velkari threw their support behind the reforms. The Fenari, ever pragmatic, calculated that a fair system would ultimately be more profitable than a rigged one, and joined the majority. The new council structure was implemented 6 months after the vote. 1 species, 1 vote. No vetoes. No permanent seats. An independent judiciary to resolve disputes. A transparency mandate requiring all trade agreements and military deployments to be publicly registered. It wasn't perfect. Nothing involving 47 different species ever would be. But it was better. Measurably, demonstrably better. 1 year after the vote, Kale Voss was approached by an unlikely visitor. He was sitting in the human embassy on the council station, a modest space that humanity had deliberately kept simple, in contrast to the ornate halls of the older delegations. When a security officer informed him that the Torani ambassador was requesting a meeting, not Drain Vorati. Drain had been recalled to the Torani homeworld 3 months after the vote, his political career effectively over. The new ambassador was younger, female, and by all accounts very different from her predecessor. Her name was Sarai Vorati, Drain's daughter. Kale met her in the embassy's small conference room. She was tall, like all Torani, but her scales had a lighter, almost golden hue that suggested youth. She moved with a careful precision that Kale recognized, the body language of someone who knew they were being watched and judged. "Ambassador Voss," she said, inclining her head. "Thank you for seeing me." "Ambassador Vorati," Kale replied, gesturing to a seat. "What can I do for you?" She sat, folded her clawed hands on the table, and looked at him with eyes that were the same golden color as her father's, but held none of his arrogance. "I want to apologize," she said. Kale raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. "My father's actions were driven by fear and greed. The Torani hegemony built its power on exploitation, and when your species threatened to dismantle that power, he reacted the only way he knew how, with force. It was wrong. I want you to know that not all Torani share his views." Kale studied her for a long moment. "I appreciate that, Ambassador, but I didn't dismantle anything. Your father's system was already falling apart. We just gave it a push." Sarai's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "A very hard push. That's what we do." She reached into a carrying case and produced a datapad. "I've come with a proposal. The Torani hegemony would like to establish a joint research initiative with Earth, medical science, agricultural technology, environmental restoration." Kale leaned back in his chair. "Why?" "Because my world is dying," Sarai said quietly. We spent so long extracting resources from others that we neglected our own planet. Our oceans are poisoned. Our soil is depleted. Our population is declining. We need help, and we have too much pride to ask for it publicly. She looked at him steadily. But I am asking you, here, now, not as a representative of a hegemony, but as a citizen of a world that is running out of time. Kale was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took the datapad. We'll help, he said. No conditions. No strings. That's not how we do things. Even after what my father tried to do to your species? Kale smiled. A real smile. Warm and tired and deeply human. Especially after that. Where we come from, Ambassador, the measure of who you are isn't how you treat your friends. It's how you treat the people who try to destroy you. Sarai stared at him. Then, slowly, she extended her own hand, mimicking the gesture she had seen Kale make on the council floor a year ago. Open palm, fingers spread. Kale took her hand and shook it. Welcome to the future, he said. Years later, historians from a dozen species would look back on that council session as a moment everything changed. The moment the galaxy stopped being a hierarchy and started becoming a community. The moment a young, loud, reckless, brilliant, infuriating species stood on the floor and said what everyone else had been thinking but was too afraid to say. They called it the Voss Address. It was studied in universities across 100 worlds. It was translated into every known language. It was quoted by leaders and revolutionaries and ordinary citizens who had never thought they had a voice until a human showed them how to use one. But Kale Voss never liked the attention. When journalists asked him about it, he would shrug and say something characteristically human. I just told the truth, he'd say. That's the easiest thing in the world. It's also the most dangerous. And then he'd smile that tired, warm, deeply human smile. But somebody had to do it. In the vast darkness between stars, humanity kept building. Not an empire, not hegemony. Something better. Something that looked a lot like hope.